Hello, Professor Ford here to talk a little bit about volunteers in the nonprofit sector. Now, if you read I'm reading it right now, see? If you read chapter 9 in the Worth text, you'll see that there is a whole chapter dedicated to human resource management in the nonprofit sector. You're going to read that, so I don't want to be too repetitive. Especially on the part about managing nonprofit employees, because we have an entire class dedicated to human resource management in this program. And in the Worth text, they review Theory X and Theory Y leadership, motivation theories, a little bit of traditional scientific management, the Herzberg motivators, motivation hygiene theory. All the things that we discuss in class about why people work, why people want to work, how you match that, your management style with the individual employee type, what works and what doesn't work, etc. And really, most of that from the nonprofit sector, from the public sector, is going to translate really well to the nonprofit sector, because we're dealing with a similar population of individuals that are working in part because they have this public service motivation. Perhaps it's intrinsic, perhaps it comes from their formal training, perhaps it comes from their passion for a unique topic. But regardless, I want to focus instead on volunteers, because this isn't a human resource management course. This is trying to look specifically at what's unique to the nonprofit sector, and certainly the level of volunteerism in the nonprofit sector is pretty unique, and not something that you're ever going to encounter, or you're rarely going to encounter in government and or the public sector. And think of that the previous lecture that you've already should have watched about the 990 form. We were looking at the Oshkosh Community Food Pantry, and I believe they have 4 employees and then 250 volunteers. For an organization like that, and for many organizations that are nonprofits, volunteer management is the name of the game. And I'll ask you this question, if you can raise your hand at home. Any of you ever manage volunteers? I'll raise my hand. Any of you good at managing volunteers? I'm not going to raise my hand on that one, because it's difficult. It is tough. It's as much as when I talk about organizational management, as much as I buy into theories of, theory Y individuals, people want to work. People want to work in areas where they feel these passions. People are motivated by things other than money. People want to make a difference in their community. People want to know that their job matters. As much as I believe that stuff, and I believe that stuff is real, there is something about that paycheck that creates some type of accountability. In my own experience, trying to manage volunteers, I find that they often don't show up. I shouldn't say often. Sometimes they don't show up. And if you're trying to manage these individuals, you kind of think, well, I'm irritated, because this is a situation where we needed volunteers. We planned for volunteers. We recruited volunteers. The volunteers volunteered. Yet they're not here, but we're not paying them. So can I really, call them, come back to them and say, I'm disciplining you, or you're not, you're going to come into my office, I need to talk to you. You don't have that accountability, that leverage from a management standpoint. And it's tricky. It's also hard to say no to volunteers when people that are well-meaning might come volunteer to do something, but maybe you don't need them. Maybe what they're good at is not what you want. Maybe they have outdated notions of what works and what doesn't work in this organization. We're dealing with it with an organization I'm involved with right now, where we have a youth program that has had a similar small closed circle of volunteers that have run this youth program for probably about 15 years. They designed their own programming. They were good at it. They're passionate about it. They care about it. The program's outdated. There's really no other way to put it. The program's outdated. It's not best serving our constituency. But how do we tell these motivated volunteers who have given so much to this organization and care so much about this that, yeah, we know you still want to do it, but nah, we don't need you anymore. We don't want you anymore. It's difficult. It's a situation where it's very easy for managers to kind of shirk it. In other words, just ignore the problem. Either allow it to go, the service to be provided at a subpar quality or in a way that's not consistent with the mission of the organization or the goals of the current leadership of the organization, or you just kind of ignore it. Sometimes you wait them out. My favorite is to say, we're going to try something new, but we want you to be involved. So, we're going to bring all these people together, including the people that we really want to be running it with the program that we really care about, but also you, and now you can all work together. It sounds good, but the reality of it is we're bringing in these new people because we don't want you here anymore. Not because we don't like you, but because we want this new service. We want things done this way. In my experience, managing volunteers in that way is generally not good. It's kind of like a Band-Aid. The fact is that you're going to, when you turn down a volunteer out of the best interest of the mission of the organization, you're probably going to hurt feelings. There certainly is a delicate way to do that, but it's best to be honest and direct and to serve the mission of the organization. Because don't forget, as a board member, and this particular organization is one in which I'm a board member, as a board member or as an executive director, your responsibility is to the mission of the organization, not to individuals, not to friends. And that sounds cold and callous. It just does. But that's part of leadership, is that you have to be able to understand and compartmentalize those personal relationships against the best interests of the organization for which you are charged with overseeing, for that mission for which you are protecting. So all that said, one of the things that Wirth stresses about managing volunteers, and one of the things that a good deal of the more academic nonprofit literature stresses regarding volunteers, is that the more we can professionalize volunteerism, that sounds weird, doesn't it? But the more we can professionalize volunteerism in the nonprofit sector, the more we can minimize that awkwardness and some of that negative ambiguity. If you've taken enough of my classes, you know that I love ambiguity. If you're doing the final project for this class, you'll know that I love ambiguity, because part of developing a policy report like that is letting people kind of find their own way and making it work. For volunteers, ambiguity, there is a thing called negative ambiguity. It's one thing to put motivated, good people to work and allow them to find their passions and find what really motivates them personally. It's another thing to not have clear policies that you can fall back on to really maximize the positive impact of those that want to volunteer for your nonprofit organization and its mission, and to minimize some of that awkwardness that can come from some of the situations I just shared with you, the anecdotes I just shared with you. So I'm going to start here by just walking through really through the Wirth text and trying to stay as close to it. The idea here being that you can read this, you can listen to it, and one of those ought to sink in. So on page 256 is where the volunteerism section starts in Wirth. This is in the 5th edition, so if you have the 4th edition, it's going to be in that neighborhood. But table 9.3, Wirth goes through different types of volunteers, and the argument being is that you can classify different volunteer types, and that there's really different strategies for managing those different types of volunteers. The first is a spot volunteer, and he defines that as those who participate casually, usually on one occasion. So those are I'd say the simplest volunteers to manage. I'm on, my neighborhood association board. Our neighborhood association In and of itself, it's not an independent nonprofit, but we're part of an umbrella organization where we share the C3 classification, and we do, much like what's written on here, we do every year a clean up the neighborhood event. We do it at Menominee Park. If you're familiar with Oshkosh, if you're not, it doesn't matter. Where we have everyone come together in April and basically pick up garbage on the shoreline. Not a lot of pressure. We don't ask who's coming ahead of time. We just advertise it to the neighborhood. We make sure that all of our board members, we know someone's going to be there. We organize some coffee. We bring some garbage bags, and we get there, and it's a fairly easy task. And say, all right, let's go pick up some garbage. We're done picking up the garbage. We say, all right, we're going to head over to the local school, which is a couple blocks away. We're going to pick up garbage on the ball diamond. It all goes against the fence. Go against the fence, pick up the garbage, put it in the bag, bring it back here. We'll bring it to the dump. Easy. The stakes are, it's important work. Don't get me wrong. There's a reason we're doing it. Strengthen the neighborhood. But at the same time, it's not like if someone shows up or doesn't show up, it's going to kill the project. It's a one-time deal. Then there's episodic volunteers. And these may participate on only one occasion or multiple occasions for brief periods of time. And so the example there that Worth gives is distributing food during the holiday season. Again, to go back to my mother, my poor mom, I keep talking about her. When she managed the food pantry, they also did a thing over the holidays where they would, they call it the giving tree, where they would give presents to kids. So basically, families could register that they need help providing presents for their children during the holiday season. Parishioners of the church or just members of the community could sign up to basically sponsor a family, and there's this massive distribution of this massive logistical challenge of both accepting, organizing, and distributing gifts. And there was lots of people that volunteered just for that intense 1 month period. Those are episodic volunteers. So while the stakes are higher with them, there's a clear start date, there's a clear end date. It's intense, but the idea there is that you have people that are highly engaged, they know exactly what they want to do, and there's that almost added mental benefit that they know there's a start and that there's an end. Temporary committees, we do this stuff all the time. I've mentioned the Oshkosh Area Food Co-op. I'm on the site selection team. One of the things that Dr. Larson's actually a board member, so she's a volunteer. That's a regular volunteer. We'll talk to a second later. I'll talk to you in a minute. But like an episodic volunteer, we're doing the site selection team. So I am just on that to take a look, vet some buildings. I know it's a temporary thing. The idea, I have a very specific kind of skill set. In this case, I'm on the planning commission, so I know a little bit about planning, a little bit about the property in the area. The idea there is match that skill set for a period of time for this specific task. There we go. Short term. Then there's your regular volunteers. So these are kind of the unpaid staff. So this might be something if you go volunteer at a school once a week. I used to do this when I was in Milwaukee. I'm laughing because it was a 6th grade classroom, an after-school program on the south side of Milwaukee school. And man, I just got eaten alive. I would go in there and tutor, and at first I was trying to tutor the entire class, and it's a big difference teaching 6th graders versus college students. I learned this, and it turned into a thing. Every Monday I would do a one-on-one with a student who needed help in math. I'm no mathematical genius, but I could do 6th grade math, and that's what worked. But it was a regular thing. The difficulty there starts to be planning. People are busy. They're counting on me, and there needs to be clear lines of communication that I'm going to be there on Monday. I'm not going to be there. They need to know it. They need to be able to plan for it. They needed to be able to make sure that I knew what I was doing, that I was adding a benefit. Like if I was really attached to mentoring the whole class, even though I was bad at it, that would have been a problem. Luckily, I am at least somewhat self-aware to know that this was not working for anybody. And they shifted my responsibility as regular volunteer. But the point is, a regular volunteer, it's scheduled. It goes on for a while. And I brought up Dr. Larson a second ago in her position as a board member on the food co-op, or Dr. Filipova at Evergreen. She's been the president of that board for a while now. These are all regular commitments that require a kind of a specialized skill set that takes some time to develop. Oftentimes, these regular volunteers, people grow on the job, much like they do in a regular job. Encouraged or mandated volunteers. What encourage? I keep thinking of when the guys from the prison. I shouldn't laugh at the guys from the prison, but when the guys from the prison come to the park and start setting up holiday decorations in Oshkosh, they're encouraged to do that. They're mandated to do that. Right? That's not they're incarcerated individuals. Maybe if you went to high school, I'm guessing most of you went to high school, but maybe you went to a school where there was a service requirement and you did some service on this. Oftentimes, employees of organizations that are more public facing, so law firms, that type of thing, they want to be good citizens, good corporate citizens, and they will basically require that individuals volunteer for things. Now, this can be an asset from a nonprofit standpoint, saying that we know these people have to do it. So whereas an episodic volunteer or even a regular volunteer might be here because they think they're going to like it. If they don't like it, they might just go. This person is encouraged or required to volunteer. We know that we can get them for a while. I shouldn't say treat them a little differently, but there is just inevitably you're going to treat them a little differently if you know they need to be there. There's kind of more of that exchange theory going on there, where the exchange is not just this warm glow that we're giving the volunteer an opportunity to give back in the way they want to. We're doing that, but then we're also allowing them to satisfy a mandate that they are required to have from, or that was put on them by other aspects of their life, including their paid employment, or, if it's a prisoner's case, the state. And then there's virtual volunteers. So these are ones that might be serving the organization from afar via electronic technology. This is a new one. There's not much out there about that, but I've been on a few kind of subcommittees where there has been virtual volunteers. People are retired and they winter in Arizona or Florida, and we basically Skype them into meetings, and we share all of our documents and things online. And it's certainly different. It's a lot different than just. I find that you make more use of your time, because it's very easy to have a meeting just because we're going to have a meeting once a month. But if you're going to do a virtual meeting, it's very much, okay, let's have all the materials set out ahead of time, more planning, if we're going to actually do this, because it takes some logistical thought, and sometimes we don't even have the meeting because we realize that there is no need for a meeting. But all these different types of volunteers require different skill sets. So why do individuals volunteer? Well, this is one where I'll put a little message board question there, because I think that's a good question to consider. Have you volunteered? Why do you volunteer? But as a nonprofit manager, that's something you want to be aware of. Why are individuals volunteering? What motivates? Just like you would a public sector employee or a private sector employee. Why is this person here? How can I, as a manager, in this case managing a volunteer, how can I make sure that I am placing that person in an individual where they can have their motivation satisfied, where their motivation can lend itself to maximizing performance. So their own individual performance, but also that would tie into the organizational performance as a whole. So, and read a little bit about that, the motivations of volunteers. But I think that's one where we'll learn more from the message boards than me rambling on. Let's talk about the actual, the hard stuff. The hard stuff, I don't mean difficult, but I mean like the hard skills that you might want to take into the volunteer management practice, or to meet the volunteer management challenge. First is the ability to assess the need for volunteers. You don't want volunteers. You don't want to solicit volunteers if you don't need volunteers. Again, an anecdote, but I was volunteered. I guess this would place me on one of those looking through the workbook at the table 9.3. I was a mandated volunteer. In this case, I was mandated by my lovely partner. She had volunteered me to move a Christmas tree. Sure, I will move a Christmas tree. It was Saturday morning. I was supposed to be there at 8:30. I'm a punctual guy. I got there at 8:30. Christmas tree was already moved. It's devastating. But I'm there, so I'm kind of like, all right, Christmas tree's already moved. Do you want me to go? Should I do something else? And they had nothing else for me to do, but they didn't want to tell me to go because they knew that I had volunteered, given them a Saturday morning. So I basically just kind of wandered around aimlessly, helping people with tasks they probably didn't really need help with. Basically, right, we wasted each other's time. They were scrambling to try to find things for me to do that really weren't necessary, where I wasn't needed. I was doing things that, beyond what I thought I was going to do, and it wasn't. It was a waste of everybody's time. It could have discouraged the volunteer. In this case, that was me. But right, it can really discourage the volunteer from doing it again, saying, "Well, last time I volunteered, I gave up a day, gave up a morning, and they didn't need me. They did what I was asked to do was already done. So why would I volunteer there again?" It's a good way to alienate people. It's a good way to waste some of that valuable volunteer motivation. So you want to assess your volunteer. Do we actually need this person? We shouldn't start off by saying, "Well, I want as many volunteers as possible." We should figure out how many volunteers do we actually need and why do we need them. We just had another neighborhood event where we got a dumpster. I found the unifying what's the word I'm looking for? The thing that most unifies our neighborhood is not our ideology or our work schedules. It's garbage. We all have junk we wanted to get rid of. So the event was a big success, and one of the things we did ahead of time is we sought out volunteers, but we had a very specific schedule with tasks. How many volunteers do we need? We need from 7:30 to 9, one person to stay with the dumpster so people from outside the neighborhood don't dump random stuff in there. And 2, somebody to sign in individuals that are getting rid of things. And 3, someone who can help unload people's vans and trucks. So we knew we had these different time slots, and we needed 3 people, and each of those individuals had a clear responsibility. People have called afterwards and say, "I'd like to volunteer from 7:30 to 9. Those slots were filled. We said, "Nope, those slots are filled. We don't need you. If you want to come with these other times, that's great. If not, we'll get you next time we need volunteers." It was a very easy way to plan, but that small step ensured that no one's time was being wasted, and all the volunteer coverage we had was there. There's another fail-safe. One of the things we did is we had board members essentially volunteer to be backups, saying that, "Okay, I'll take this slot 7:30 to 9, but you know what? I'm going to be available all morning, so if someone backs out, doesn't show up, because these are volunteers, it happens, I'm there as backup, as coverage. You just call me." So we had planned to make the most of everybody's time, but also have that contingency backup in case it was needed. And our board members are more than happy to do that, because that's part of the responsibility of being a board member or in a leadership role in an organization, is that when things don't go as planned, oftentimes it's not about complaining about it. Well, it shouldn't be about complaining that it didn't go as planned. It's about problem solving. Didn't go as planned. How are we going to make it go as planned? So assess. That's a pretty simple thing, right? But if you have a regular, ongoing thing, not just a one-day event, assess how often do you need it. We need 4 volunteers every Wednesday. For how long? Maybe it's maybe it's a school thing, so it's for a semester, whatever. But really be honest with yourself and assess it, and try to figure out. I guess that this next step, which is just as important, is develop volunteer job descriptions. If you want to make sure you're getting people that are most geared toward the task that you're signing them up for, create a job description just like you would for a public sector organization. What is it that this person needs to do? Give them a title. Who do they report to? What are their responsibilities? What is their timeline, or I guess their work schedule? That may seem a little bit over the top, but just creating a volunteer job description does 2 things. One, it forces the organization, from their point of view, to articulate exactly what it is they want done in exactly what skills are needed to do it. So it creates that foresight, not just, oh yeah, volunteers are good. No, it creates that formal, that ensures that formal discussion and thought went into it. Second, it gives the individual that's volunteering both an idea of what they're volunteering for, right? It's one thing to say, yeah, I'd like to volunteer for the park district. That's a bad example. That's a government entity. I'd like to volunteer for the Friends of the Park organization. See, that's a real one. Okay, what is it you want to do? Well, I like parks. I'll go over there and do something with the park. That's fine, but that's pretty vague. It's another thing to say that, okay, we are looking for a volunteer to mow this play area at the park. We need them to do it once a week for this period of time, summer, maybe this 4-month period. That's what we need. Right? One of those things is ensuring you're getting a volunteer that knows what they're doing, understands exactly what their role and commitment will be, and has some of that internal accountability because it's spelled out. It's not one of those things where you sign up and then you're like, oh, this is more than I thought. Well, it should never be that because it was written in a job description. So no matter how small your organization is, creating a volunteer job description is an easy no-brainer to make sure that on your end, you've given the proper thought to what you're looking for, and on the volunteer end, you're maximizing the likelihood of getting a good match that actually works out long term. You're minimizing attrition if they know what they're doing. And if you look at page 262 and 261 in Worth, you'll note that they have all kinds of, or I guess a nice little example there that includes, qualifications and things like that. And that's some of the specific things that might come into play. If you're working with children, oftentimes you might have to have a student or a volunteer do a background check. That needs to be in there in the job description. Occasionally, you'll need to have insurance policies, or you might be looking for a volunteer that has a driver's license or has a lawnmower, to use my previous example. But that can be all spelled out, which also creates some protection too, and gives you the ability to say, no, I'm sorry, we don't need you because you don't have a driver's license. Nothing personal. We have these other opportunities for you, but you don't fit the job description here for this volunteer. Doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, it's not like you have to have a massive interviewing thing where you're hiring somebody at a private or a public sector organization, but you do want to maximize the tools you have from a management perspective to get the best person for the job, and to maximize the likelihood that job gets done in a satisfactory manner. The next thing is policies. What do you expect out of your volunteers? What is their purpose? What does it mean to be a volunteer for this organization? Are there other things that you're looking for? So if it's like a religious-based organization, are you expecting them to be a member of the faith? Are you expecting them to be a member of the actual faith-based organization, of the congregation? Are you expecting somebody, if it's a regional-based thing, a neighborhood thing, are you expecting them to be in the neighborhood? Right, laying out these policies and including these procedures about what is required to apply, what type of information you need about this individual, that gives you, from the management side, a whole lot of protection. It's similar to human resources. I mean, the best way to avoid a human resource, I won't say crisis, but problem, right? The best way to minimize the risk of a bad employee is to not hire them in the first place. Well, the best way to minimize the risk of a failed volunteer or a poor volunteer is to ensure they're never a volunteer in the first place. And that may sound cold and callous, but you want a volunteer that adds value to the organization, however you define that, not one that becomes a resource suck from the valuable work of the organization. That's not just because it could be a pain and nobody wants to have their time wasted. It's because if you're spending time trying to deal with problems that are created by a volunteer, that means that's time that's not being spent on the mission, right? That is stuff that has nothing to do with the mission at hand. The mission of no organization is to try to deal with an unreliable volunteer. So part of being a good steward of an organization is making sure that you're maximizing resources going to that mission. And part of that is making sure that you are managing volunteers in a way that's conducive to satisfying that mission and doesn't detract from that mission. Other things that come up in the Worth text: providing a sufficient budget and personnel to manage the volunteer program. Got to have a point person. Volunteers can be like directionless sheep, and that's not their fault. They don't walk into an organization knowing how it's structured. They need to be told what to do. It doesn't mean they won't show initiative. It doesn't mean that you have a whole spectrum or range of volunteers in terms of their capacities, and I guess comfort with ambiguity. But they need to have a point person. So there should always be, just like you would for a regular employee, there should be direct lines of reporting and communication between someone who's managing the volunteer and the volunteer themselves. Sometimes for an organization that's a little more sophisticated, you can have a volunteer coordinator that's larger. Sometimes it might just be the executive director. But the point is, it's clear to both sides how that line of communication is set up. I thought it was interesting the Worth suggestion that you recruit and hire volunteers as if they were employees. And I think what he's getting at there is really with that point and also the next 2 points about making sure we have orientation and training and clear goals and performance evaluations. It gets at the point I made earlier that you want to make sure that you are recruiting and utilizing volunteers in a way that's furthering the mission of the organization, as opposed to a way that is detracting from the ability of your nonprofit organization to satisfy its mission. So you don't want volunteers just for the sake of volunteers. You want to have volunteers where there's a need for volunteers and where there's an ability for volunteers to actually complete the task at hand. So if you finish up with the Worth text, you'll see all kinds of good stuff about the future of volunteerism. On the message boards, I encourage you to share any experience you have either managing volunteers or recruiting or actually serving as a volunteer, things that you're looking for in volunteers for a nonprofit organization. And you'll note that as part of the final project, I am going to ask one of you to write a little bit about volunteerism in the nonprofit sector, kind of a little bit of guide to how you should go about it and what their roles are. So with that, I look forward to, as always, seeing you on the message boards. Thanks.